Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Rewind Pod. I'm here with Jamie, who is the host of Just Get a Real Job podcast. I'm going to let Jamie introduce himself because I don't think I can be able to do it justice. Jamie, do you want to introduce yourself?
How's it going, Molly? Thank you very much for having me on Rewind. So I'm Jamie. I host a podcast called Just Get a Real Job, which is all about demystifying the creative industries, and I've been doing that for nearly 5.5 years. And basically, I started it because the creative industries, as many people listening might know, is it's such a hard industry to navigate. And when I was sort of wanting to work in TV, which I do on, like, that's sort of my bread and butter, that's my day job outside of podcasting, I just didn't really know where to start. I'd graduated from a master's degree in screenwriting, and I was like, I don't know how to get into this. So I wanted to sort of create something as a bit of a toolkit for people, interviewing various people working creative careers and just have honest chats about how you actually work in that industry. And yeah, I've been doing that for 5.5 years, nearly 200 episodes, so it's been a crazy journey with that.
Mental. You're so right though. I mean, like myself, like I work in the creative industries as well, and it's tough. It's really, really tough. And I just love the title of your podcast because how many times is it when you've went for a job or you've done something, you're always told, can you just go and get a real job? So with you like starting your podcast, what was the kind of inspiration behind starting it?
Well, it's interesting because obviously now I have such a defined mission with it, like the way I talk about it, demystifying the creative industries as a toolkit, like that was always there, but I don't think I maybe had the language or quite like understand it when I first started it. Like in truth, like I remember I'd always wanted to do some sort of project, and it's so interesting looking back in my like life as a kid, or I was always trying to do something, whether that be doing a performance at school in drama, trying to start a band as a teenager. I always wanted some sort of creative project outside of my like day-to-day life, and it's interesting that I finally found that when I was like 23, 24, and I've been doing it so long now. But I don't know if you remember back in 2020, the Tories had an advert called, it was all about retraining in cyber, and I think the advert was like Fatima needs to retrain in cyber, and she was a ballerina or something. And I remember at the time thinking, that's really annoying and quite undervalues the arts. And I sort of had this idea, and originally it was going to be called the Tortured Artist Podcast, which is a dreadful title for a podcast. And my best friend Liam, who I'm constantly giving my friend Liam credit for this, but he was like, you should call it something like Just Get a Real Job. And I thought, yeah, that's actually way better. So I can't even take credit for the title. But the one thing I find with the title, which is the only annoying thing, is for branding and stuff, it's such a long title to get into things.
Yeah.
So obviously your podcast, Rewind, nice and easy, you can get that on a poster. Just Get a Real Job, much more like, it's quite hard for that. And the amount of people have done their show or have been in the paper or whatever who have said the podcast name wrong is quite common. But I do love the title, and I think it is key to the mission of the podcast, and feedback I get is, I love the name. So yeah, fair play to my best pal for coining that.
You'll be taking rights for it, put it on the IP of it, but it's such a clever thing. I mean, like I said, it is it's probably one of the biggest industries that I think of that we all use for forms of entertainment. Everybody consumes content on so many different bases now, whether it is content that's made for television, for smaller platforms, or, for social media. And then you've obviously got the in-person type of content, like you said, ballet dancing, in-person arts. And I feel like it's one of the things where we all consume it, but we're always the first people to go, that's not, like you're saying, that's not a real job, it's not, and it's something like, it kind of is that kind of thing that I look at and I go, well, hold on a minute, like it's always the first one that kind of gets, I don't want to say shit on, because I don't actually have a better phrase for it, but it's always the first one that does kind of get shit on, and yeah, it's something that we consume all the time. So is that something that you kind of, like you're saying, wanted to demystify, and you wanted to go, actually this is a proper integral part of our society?
Yeah, 100%. I think you're touching on something very accurate. Often across the UK, not just in Scotland, but like the arts can be something that's quite easily cut when budgets are being cut. We're speaking at a time where it's so difficult to have a career in a creative job. And I think as I've gone on with Just Get a Real Job, I've noticed more and more the sort of class issues in the arts, and that's something really key to sort of my mission at the moment with the podcast. Like, social mobility in the arts is a huge problem. I mean, even when I work in TV, like we're speaking at, I just got made redundant about 2.5 months ago. I was working on River City as a script editor, and like I'm a freelancer now, and I've never been. It's my first time in my career in TV after 5 years being a freelancer. It's really tough out there, and the systems don't really mix well with creative jobs. Like, I don't think there's a lot of understanding about it for a whole host of reasons. Whether that's from employers, where it's from people coming out of school, like, these jobs aren't very well understood, and I think that's sometimes maybe why people don't see the arts as a viable career. And I totally understand parents' hesitation for their kids to maybe want to have that career, because it isn't very sustainable. And if you come from a working class background like myself, like, there isn't always that like sustainable path. Like, I am working at the moment, but I'm not working consistently, and it's been a really interesting few months for me, sort of pivoting into this weird marketplace where there isn't as many jobs. And yeah, it's difficult. I mean, class is a huge barrier. I think the other part of it is, I think the creative industries is such a glamorized industry, and it's quite a middle class industry. So there's not a lot of sympathy sometimes for people, because they're like, well, all these people are probably quite posh, they're all quite well off, they're just doing their hobby as a career. So it's harder maybe for a media outlet to feel sympathetic towards job losses in this industry, where, you know, the amount of people in the TV industry out of work at the moment, they reckon there was a recent Beckley poll that put it at potentially 70% of people are either not working regularly or are out of work in TV and film at the moment in the freelance workforce. You know, that's not really getting a lot of media coverage, whereas like if a steelworks that had happened there, that would be in the news. And that's no disrespect to like people working at steelworks. I think both are important, but I think there's a lack of understanding about that in the industry. I think, yeah, there's a whole host of reasons for that, because the structural way it's set up.
That makes perfect sense, and you know, you hit that right on the head there. You know, like, how many times have we, you know, switched on the news? We had the whole thing about, you know, was it Tata Steel a couple of years ago that, you know, was getting bailed out by the government. You know, you will never see, you know, an arts foundation, or, you know, you know, River City is a massive integral part of Scottish culture. How's that not getting bailed out? But, you know, it's having to take that skill and apply it somewhere else. So is that something that you come across all the time with it? You know, it's like people just being like chameleons and having to go from one thing to another thing to another thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it's coming at a time when things like, I know I'm about to mention AI on a podcast, I hope it's not too cliche, but I think we are about to go into a really uncertain period where it's going to be so common, not just in the creative industries, but all industries, that people might have multiple careers and have to retrain constantly and stuff. So I think it's probably a good skill, but I think the biggest thing I've taken away from nearly 200 episodes of Just Get a Real Job is, firstly, no career path is linear. Everyone's path in this industry is completely different, and also the amount of people I interview who have got various sources of income. So they might they're in a band, for example, but they maybe do something else at the weekend that's like music adjacent, or, you know, they have multiple skills and ways of making money and stuff. And I think that's becoming more and more common, whereas like if you do one job, you might, I don't know, you're able to do something else in a similar industry. I think that's becoming quite common as jobs are becoming scarcer in the creative industries. But yes, it's really tricky. I'm kind of feeling that at the moment, where I'm like, am I going to have to start reskilling? And I'm maybe lucky enough that I do podcasting as well as script editing, so I've got different skills. But yeah, it's hard. I think the government are sort of aware of it without being too political. I think there is some good things happening, but it does sometimes feel slow. I interviewed Ian Murray, who's the Creative Industries Minister last year, and, you know, they're talking about appointing a freelance champion. I think that's recently been announced officially, so that should be coming soon. Obviously, we're about to change government in the UK as well, so I don't know how that will affect things. But I don't know, we do need more investment in the creative industries, but I think we also just need more support across the board, and I hope that can come.
No, you're absolutely right. It's, do you know, it's mental to think it just shows you how much everything has evolved. Because I think even when I went to uni, the idea of freelancing and things like that, just, it wasn't really a standardised job profile. It wasn't something you say, no, I'm going to set out and I'm going to become a freelancer. They were the jobs that you done through uni so that you weren't always in debt all the time. Like that was how it worked. You know, that's what I done. That's what I think many of us all done. So that now it's I don't even think we call it a gig economy anymore. It's more like a standardised, you know, picking up jobs and everything. It's mental to me. But then, like you're saying about a class system, you think about billionaires, they've not only just got one source of income coming in. You know, it's all that. It's almost like it's okay for them to have, I feel like this is getting really political. You know, it's like it's okay for them to have loads of different sources of income. They can be, you know, head, chair, CEO of various different companies, but, you know, when it's down to a freelancer doing, right, okay, I'm going to write this script, I'm going to write that script, it's almost seen as something that you know, two totally different camps. But like you were saying there about interviewing, like having different guests and stuff in your podcast, has there been like an episode or like a guest that you've had and you've been like, oh my god, I can't actually believe I've got to do this? Is there any of them that you thought, oh my god, this is brilliant?
I mean, there's been so many moments with the podcast where it's sort of a bit surreal. Like, I've done The Fringe before and stuff and done live shows with some incredible people. I mean, interviewing the Minister for Creative Industries was one of those moments last year because the government actually reached out to me, knew what my podcast was, and like that was a bit mad, like having advisors on the call before. They were all really nice in fairness, but it was a bit like, well, this is insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been loads of standout moments of the show. Like, it sort of evolved so much over the years. Like, when I first started it, I was interviewing friends, and it's recently become, a thing where it's like I meet so many new people. And in all honesty, I've not had a lot of huge celebrities on the show because it's not really that sort of show. I wanted to sort of be people doing this job day to day. But I have had the chance to speak to some bigger names and people like Isa from Still Game, Jamie Mackinlay. I've had on. I've had like big comics like Jordan Brooks, Simon Hennessy, like people like that who are great guests as well. And sometimes you do get a bit nervous. Like, I had Margaret McDonald, who wrote one of my favourite books I read last year, Glasgow Boys, on, and I was like weirdly quite nervous for that. So yeah, it's a bit strange when you're in these situations, but you become more used to it. Like, even the podcast was nominated for a Scottish Podcast Award this year. That was mental. Like, when I started this in my bedroom, it's like, you don't expect to end up at moments like that. So even going to that on Thursday night was quite a special moment. We didn't win, sadly, but just to be in that room was, you still have a bit of imposter syndrome, I guess.
No, that would have been something amazing. I mean, I went to the launch night. I don't know if you were there at it, because I remember the launch night of it and just trying to meet as many people as I possibly could and just being like, hiya, right, all these people and all these podcasts that I follow and listen to, and then all of us all being in the room at the same time. It felt really weird to me. Like, it just been like, because all you see people is just like a little box on your phone or on your computer, do you know that? So then seeing them, like, I think it was like Ford and Shelby as well, like seeing them and going, oh my god, like, you're actually real people. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah.
But, things like that, I mean, it's, for me, I thought the podcasting industry was kind of new to me maybe about 3 years ago. I'd consumed them, but I'd never thought for a second, oh, hold on a minute, you could do this. And I talk for a living, I tell stories for a living, so I thought, right, okay, maybe there's something in it. But when you actually sat down and looked at how many Scottish podcasts there were, that blew my mind, because you think, oh yeah, there's that one, okay, there's that one, there might be about 10 that you could really think of, but there was loads, there was hundreds of them, that when you seen all the nominations and everything coming through, and I was like, there was ones that I was even like discovering that I'd never heard of before and try to discover them. So it's definitely well needed for an industry in Scotland to properly celebrate and champion Scottish talent.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much amazing talent in Scotland, not just in podcasting, but in the arts in general. And I think we really undersell ourselves as a nation. And I think seeing the Tartan Army in Boston and like the soft power of that, like, and how well it can travel, I really think we need to try and just sell ourselves as a country a bit better. I think we can, and I really hope like we can have a moment maybe like Ireland seems to have had, where their media seems to really be doing quite well. I'd love to see more of that coming out of Scotland, and hopefully podcasting can be a big part of that as well.
Absolutely. I remember speaking to Jean Johansson about it, and she was saying about something is just so nice about hearing Scottish voices. Just comforting to hear your own accent, because how many times have you seen something on the telly, you go, oh, that person's Scottish. It's such a nice feeling. And we were talking about the idea of something like Scottish voices being celebrated, being championed, like you're saying, the Tartan Army have just taken over. It's the love for people and the culture that you grew up with is just, it's so nice to see. Like, I always do wonder, like, obviously, like you're saying about Ireland and St. Patrick's Day, like, how come like we don't make that much of a fuss about like St. Andrew's Day and stuff like that? It needs a full PR total campaign going on it.
Yeah, no, 100%. But we do there's great shows and things coming out of Scotland. I just sometimes think, and it might be a UK thing as well, but I often think we can be quite negative as well sometimes. So if somebody wants to do something a bit different, I find often it's our instinct to pull them down or be like, oh, who do they think they are? I think that's a working class thing as well. Like, I still feel like that even when I post content online, I have that little bit in my head going, who do you think you are? Like, what are you doing? Do you know what I mean? And even our accents, I wonder if we like, I sometimes get slagged off by my pals when I do a podcast. They're like, you have a bit of a phone voice, and maybe that's instinctually being taught into you because, you know, you don't speak in as broad or strong an accent as you maybe grew up with. I mean, I don't know, I have a bit of a neutral East Coast accent being a Fifer and stuff, but, you know, yeah, I don't know. It's an
Totally
interesting...
agree with you. I totally agree with you. The phone voice thing is so real. Like, it's, I noticed it the first time that I ever sat down and recorded, and I just came out and I just sounded like my mum. You know, like when you were younger and you used to hear your mum on the phone, you would just cringe because you're like, you don't sound like that. And then here you are, you're sitting in front of it going, I don't sound like that. Which is what I was actually about to get on to ask you. What is the dream for you? I mean, obviously you've got the podcast, you obviously have got your career in the creative arts. Is it something you want to combine the two? Like, what is like the overall dream for you?
It's a really, really good question. I don't know, I feel a bit unsure at the moment, and in all honesty, and I do sometimes feel a bit lost because I've worked in TV for basically since the similar time to the podcast, and my day job is script editing, and I've been doing that freelance. I did that full time for 5 years till I got made redundant. I worked at STV, I've worked for the BBC with shows like River City and stuff. I do love that, but I also love doing the podcast as well, and the podcast is mine, and it's my own voice, so I think if I could do that full time and make a living from it, I'd be very open to doing that. Right now, I don't know how possible that is. As we touched on, there's so many podcasts in Scotland, it's a very saturated industry, but I think I'd love to be able to do the podcast, make a living from it would be amazing, but also to try and have a sustainable career working in the creative industries in some form would be the dream, because it just doesn't feel sustainable right now, and I don't know how long I can keep doing things as they are now, but hopefully there's going to be lots of opportunities. And what's been really nice over the last few years is I feel like I'm becoming an authority figure in my industry as well. I feel like I've had permission to maybe take on issues. I've been selected for this year's Visionaries programme, which is run by the TV Foundation, and I'm hoping that'll be a great platform for me to sort of use my voice as well. And I've got so many opinions on how the TV industry can improve, how the creative industries in general can improve, and class and social mobility is a big sort of part of that as well for me. Like, I'm really passionate about getting more working class kids into the arts and making it fairer, because right now it just isn't fair. I think people are sort of succeeding in spite of the system, not because of the system, and I think that needs to change.
No, 100%. I mean, I don't know about you, but I grew up in a really impoverished area. I mean, I grew up in poverty, and, you know, went to a school that wasn't even on any sort of league table. It wasn't great, it wasn't a good school, you know, and like you're saying, it's like almost succeeding in spite of it. You know, there's a handful of kids that manage to do well and kind of break the system, like break out of that mould. And it's one of the things that, again, you know, like we were saying earlier about, you know, somebody doing well, we have that kind of inbuilt feeling of just going, you know, that's not fair, or that's that. And you're totally right, you know, it's that kind of thing of having to just break that system and go for it. And what better way to use a medium like television, like, you know, social media, all these type of things that we are consuming. It's right there in our homes, you know, so it's right in front of you, so it's a perfect medium to do it through.
Yeah, I think it was Eddie Marsan, who's like a very acclaimed British actor. He made an amazing point. He was talking about how there's not enough working class actors coming through, and how if you're like from a slightly more privileged background, you can sort of afford to almost be mediocre. Whereas if you don't come from that background, you can't afford to be mediocre because you won't succeed. It's already so hard anyway. And I don't know about you as well, but I think often I find it quite sad when you go and see a film and you think, oh, that actor was great. They're like a new actor coming through, and you Google them and it's like, I don't know, I'm not hating on Bono, but it's like Bono's son, or do you know what I mean? It's like, it's the son of somebody quite successful. And again, that's not knocking them, because, you know, they are a very good actor, and they probably have still had to work somewhat hard to get there. But I think it just shows you how the odds are really stacked against kids that aren't coming from those backgrounds. And it just makes me very frustrated and quite sad. I know firsthand how hard it is to work in TV. It's not sustainable at the moment, and I just think there's so many people that are missing out on a chance, and they have the talent. The talent isn't the issue. There's often this rumour that the talent rises to the top, and I don't really think that's true anymore. I think it's not allowed to always rise to the top.
I totally agree with that. You know, did we not just see it there at the BAFTAs? I mean, I know it's probably a bit of a more adjacent, nuanced kind of take on it, but, you know, with, you know, the BAFTAs and that film, I Swear, you know, I can't remember his name, Davidson, I can't remember the guy's name?
Johnny Davidson.
Johnny Davidson, that's it. You know, obviously not a middle class guy, he's a very working class guy, you know, obviously he has a disability that makes him see the things that he says and, you know, things like that. But sometimes I almost kind of wonder if the outcry that had happened, that I'm not excusing anything, whatever way you sit on it, I kind of try to remain neutral. It's obviously a condition that the guy's got, so you can't help it. You do kind of wonder if the outcry would have happened if that person wasn't as, you know, working class, or if they were a bit more middle class, if they maybe even were a bit upper class. You know, there's things that I've heard people say before and it's just get brushed over, but because he's just a normal guy, it felt like there was a unfair amount of aggression towards him, you know, that it just didn't seem right, like in terms of that sort of balance. And, you know, like you said, like you always kind of, I feel like with, you know, working class kind of people with that sort of background, when you see them kind of do something that somebody else would have done and not get criticised for, it's almost like 10 times heavier for them. It's just not, the word that I'm trying to think of is completely left my mind, but it's just not fair.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's sometimes as well, it's just how people navigate a space as well, and like how often it's, I don't know, it's like you haven't learned to be in a certain space maybe, or you're not being exposed to being in a certain space. And I find that often when I went to meetings at the BBC, if I ever went down to London with in my old work with STV and TV development, like I'd be in rooms with people that just came from completely different worlds to me, and it almost just felt alien, and you don't always know how to navigate it, and you maybe say the wrong thing. It's not really the wrong thing, but like you feel like you're saying the wrong thing in the moment, and I mean that can be really tricky. And again, that's part of the disadvantage. It's not just about money or politics, and I sometimes worry I sound like a really like mad socialist or someone when I talk about these things. It's not even really. I actually try to genuinely remain as unpolitical about certain things as I can with the podcast as well, because I think we just need new ideas, and we also just need to talk about the issues as they are. And I think it's just a systemic thing, and I think that's why class has become such a big part of Just Get Real Job's mission and sort of raising awareness and stuff.
I know, I feel like this is totally taking a political turn here. So is that kind of, sometimes it is a small growth mindset that a lot of people have, you know, because like you said, you've not been exposed to these sort of things, so you don't know what the opportunity could be. But no, totally, I feel like that went so political.
No, I think it's very true that I think sometimes we just don't always we don't empower people enough in this country to think like entrepreneurs, and even the word entrepreneur has quite a negative connotation now, and it's something when I was a student I thought, oh god, entrepreneurship's terrible. And even when I started this podcast, I would never have thought I'd be using words like that, but because it sort of is almost like a treat Just Get a Real Job almost like a bit of a business now as well, so I'm having to learn these skills, and I'm sort of now realising that we do need investment, we do need to like grow things, and it can be a force for positive growth, and you know, it can really benefit our local areas if we allow small businesses to succeed and people to have these ideas. So we do need to become better at embracing that for sure.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, with the podcast, I mean, I don't get to ask this question often. In fact, I don't think I've ever actually had to ask it, because I've never really talked to anybody that's got a podcast. Who would be your ideal podcast guest?
I get asked this so often. I always feel like I'm
Do you? I thought it was being original.
No, rubbish at, I was not on podcasts in fairness, but just in passing, but I always feel like I'm rubbish at giving sort of good answers and stuff. I'd love to have somebody like Peter Capaldi on. I love the thick of it. I think it'd be great to have someone like that. I grew up as a massive fan of, well, I mean, say grew up, it's only been going for like 10 years, so I was in my early 20s, but I loved Adam Buxton's podcast growing up, so I'd love to chat to someone like Adam Buxton or someone in that sort of space. But then there's loads of people I'd really like to have my own show that maybe aren't even as big names, like people like Angela Griffin. She's a director on like Blue Lights and has done a lot of sort of amazing work around freelance, and it'd be great to speak to somebody in government, like, you know, even if it was someone like John Swinney, I'd love to sort of talk to people like that about what they're doing for the arts as well. So there's so many people I'd love to talk to. I'm trying to get more comics on the show at the moment because the Fringe is coming up and stuff, so I'd love to get sort of more comedians and things on. So yeah, there's so many guests I'd love to chat to. I feel like my mind's blanking hard here. I should have more names, but yeah.
Comedians are always a funny one, I think, when you interview them, because I've only done a couple of them, and I've always kind of found it's like a hit and miss. You know, it's almost like sometimes it is a persona that they put on, obviously, to do stand up, which is totally fine. Or, you know, you'll have like one and they are just splittingly funny that I feel like I've not even interviewed them. Like, I've not even sat down or like had a conversation with them because I am just splitting my sides laughing. You know, that I always find them like, you kind of just don't know what you're going to get. You know, are you going to get the person that you see as a stand up, or are you going to get somebody that's just like, no, this is just a persona, this is, you know, something that you know, I'm just trying to do. I always find them really funny. But it's the same with actors as well. Like, I've interviewed a couple of actors, and you know, like they've said about, you know, playing a character and all these sort of different things, but how to get into the mindset of it, it just fascinates me, absolutely fascinates me. But with that, I wanted to ask, like, what was your sort of starting inspiration from something? You know, when did you think, yep, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a microphone, sit in front, talk about this? And how did you keep that motivation going? Like, what is the thing that keeps you driving and keeps you going with it? Because to do that for 5.5 years, that's a long time to keep thinking of new episodes. So hats off to you, because I'm struggling it too. So like,
Yeah, the consistency things can be tough at times. I have had periods where I've like, I think the longest gap I had was 6 months where I didn't put anything new out. But apart from that, it's usually, at least, you know, there's not huge gaps between episodes really. I think the starting point, I kind of touched on it. I was like, I just graduated from a master's and I felt a bit like unsure what I was going to do, and I just had this idea. I had so many interesting people on the course. I was like, I want to interview them, and it did just start like that. I interviewed my course mates, like, who were doing interesting creative stuff, and then I started putting it online, and it came out, and a few people listened, and you start interviewing like people you meet on Instagram, and again, I was all quite small, just sort of local artists and things. And to be honest, the hardest thing about consistency is that you have, it can take years to build an audience. So for years, some episodes were getting like 0 downloads or like 10 downloads, and it was very slow. It's hard to keep going sometimes when you feel like you're getting no feedback. But then you have to remind yourself, like, no one, I'm not entitled for people to have to like listen to this. Like, no one, you can't force people. You have to keep providing something that's good and has value. And again, it's sometimes about how you're marketing it. Like, I do some podcast coaching with the amazing David Mackintosh, who runs Origin Story, and I think when we had our first session a couple of years ago, he described, and he didn't mean this as an insult, I thought it was brilliant. He went, "You've got a great podcast, but you're marketing it in an ASDA bag, so no one cares." And I thought, it's true, I was, because I didn't understand how it all worked. And I think if you can make it look more professional and you can market it better, then you will, you know, attract more listeners. And I think it's trying to understand that it's not always about the external numbers as well. Some episodes do better than others. I think as long as I know it's good, I'm happy. But the truth is, I just love doing it. Like, it's my main thing I talk about. Like, I remember when, like, the first date I had with my girlfriend, whose laptop I'm actually using now because mine wasn't working earlier. But like, I remember one of the things that I remember on our first date, like when we're talking, and I started talking about I know what a knob talking about a podcast on our first date, but you know, I lit up talking about it because it is my passion. And like, I've had so many moments like that where whenever I talk about it, I just feel like alive, and I honestly think about it most of the day. So I love doing it, and it's just an amazing vehicle to get to speak to some incredible people. And yeah, sometimes it's hard to keep going when you're like, oh, no one's engaging with this week's episode and stuff. But yeah, I love doing it. It can be lonely sometimes, like doing it myself. Like, my best pal edited it for about the first 150 episodes, because I used to just do audio, but I've now sort of moved to video, and he's sort of got his own life now to go and live. So it's kind of just me doing it, and it can be quite lonely and quite hard work. So
it's a new skill as well that you need to learn. Because I mean, for me, when I started the previous podcast that I had, I didn't know anything about video editing. I didn't know anything about audio. I didn't know anything about production. You know, I just thought I could just plonk myself in front of a mic and just start talking. Like, you don't think about all of the things that go into it. I mean, I'd be up to like 3-4 o'clock, you know, in the morning editing a podcast episode for it to go out at 9 o'clock the same day. You know, it was that kind of thing that nobody taught me how to do that. Nobody taught me how to video edit. It's still garbage. I'm still totally shite at it, but you have to learn the skills. And you know, like this time on my own, like I don't have a production. I don't have somebody to fix the audio for me. I don't have that. I'm kind of doing it on my own. So it's like, I need to be like an editor or production, you know, and you need to be like so many hats. And you know, it's total credit to you. You were saying about, you know, talking about a podcast like on a first date. I struggle with it because like you said, you know, you don't want to say oh, I've got this or I've got that. You don't want to raise your head above the parapet and say, I do this, I do that. Like you're saying, the fear of being thought of as a roaster or a riddy or something like that. You don't want to do it, but like you saying, the passion and everything just comes out because you go, I actually get to do this. Like this is so fun.
Yeah, do you know something interesting as well? I was really self-conscious about starting a podcast, but I mean, even when I did it 5.5 years ago, it was still quite, a lot of people had podcasts, but it's now become like more of a podcast, like everyone, because I feel like literally everyone now has one. I'm glad I at least started it before that, but I was always quite self-conscious, like, oh, I hate that stereotype of like man with a podcast type thing, so I always try really hard to have quite a variety of guests from various backgrounds, like, and make sure it's sort of like, I'm not like, strict. I've not got a quota, but I do try and make sure I'm getting like equal voices, not just having like male guests on all the time or whatever. I try to really make sure that it's a good variety of guests, and I'm really proud of it actually. I think it really is quite a great variety, and I think what I really like is that when I look on the listener stats on YouTube, it's pretty much an equally like gender split of listeners, which I really like because it appeals to both, and all people from all backgrounds and stuff. I really like that about the podcast. Something quite proud of actually is seeing that in the sort of listenership.
Yeah, no, totally, as you should be. That's hard. I remember the podcast studio that I used to record in. The guy that owned the podcast studio that I used to record in, he said when we'd started out, and I was like, oh, I only got like 150 listens, I only got, this, that, and he said, try and imagine 150 people in a room. Like, you would be, if somebody came to something that you'd went to, 150 people is a lot of people, so you're kind of downgrading a number because it doesn't have extra zeros on top of it. It was the best piece of advice that anybody gave me. And you think, oh, actually that's 150 people that took the time out to sit down for an hour to listen to this, which is mental.
Yeah, no, definitely. And if you think about the sort of venues in town in Glasgow, for example, that you could fill with that, then that is a nice feeling.
It is. It's a lovely. I mean, you're obviously going to have so much more than that, but it's the thing when you think of, imagine every single one of them as an individual person. It kind of makes you go, all right, they listen to me. They want to listen to me. It's a nice feeling.
But the other thing that I've been sort of told as well is sometimes it's great if an episode, say, has a couple of thousand listens or whatever, but it's actually better if 200 people just come back next week. That's more important than having a one episode that. So I think I try and think a bit like that retention and having that loyal listener base and stuff. And it's so nice when you get messages from people online or you'd followed somebody for years and years and years. And I've made loads of friends from doing the show as well, which is great. Like people I just have met parasocially and things like that. And I sort of I'm not going to announce it fully because we haven't officially sort of put it up online, but I'm actually about to start a new podcast with somebody I met from interviewing on my own show, and we're about to sort of join forces, and I'm really excited about this project, and we've been recording it on and off we've been working on it behind the scenes for nearly a year, so that'll be launching very soon. It might be out by the time this is out, so I don't, in case it isn't, I'm very excited, and it's lovely. The things I was talking about to you earlier, but it can be quite lonely. It's really nice working with somebody else and taking all the things I've learned with Just Get a Real Job into this new thing as well. What to not do is really, really useful. So I'm really excited about that, and we've had some really great guests and stuff on as well. So really excited.
Congratulations, that's fantastic. And like you said, it's the people that you meet when you do things like this. I mean, I've met the 3 people who didn't think that you obviously didn't follow them, didn't do anything before it, and then you end up being friends with them, and it's like all because you sat down, you've had a conversation with them and went, this is actually quite nice. We've kind of learned all the hard bits about each other, and then we'll go on to be friends after it.
No, it's a lovely thing. It's really nice, and it just allows you just get to meet and interact with people in an interesting way as well. It's the best thing about it for sure.
Well, with that, there's a couple of questions that I just want to ask, like quick fire rounds before we finish up. But the first one is, if you could describe your journey, whether it's your podcast, your career, just your whole journey in total, what would you do to sum it up? It can be a word, it can be a sentence, whatever you feel. I know it's so tough.
Snakes and ladders, I'd say.
Never heard that one. That's a good one. And
it's a zigzag.
And if there's any advice that you would give to anyone, whether it is someone that's wanting to start their own podcast, or whether it is somebody that's working in the arts, what's something that you could give to them? I mean, obviously we've talked about, like you said, it can be really tough, it can be quite isolating, that you can be doing things on your own. How do you have that sort of mental toughness and clarity to keep going?
I think it's really hard. I think most people listening, if you're creative, especially, like your identity is usually wrapped up in what you do for a living or what you do as your passion. So my identity is partly wrapped up in my podcast and in my career. That's not a bad thing, but you have to be really careful of that. I lost my job at STV about, it was like 3.5 years ago. It was when I first got that job. I did it for 2 years. I loved it. I worked in TV development. I was an assistant script editor. Before that, I was a trainee script editor. I loved that job, and they couldn't renew my contract. I honestly, it felt like grief, and I've lost, family members and stuff before, but it felt similar to that. Like I was really, really down about that for months and months. Even when I started working at River City, I started that job almost feeling like I'd been defeated, and I think it made me probably a little bit more cynical. But I think it was a great lesson, and I've tried to take this into the redundancy I've just went through as well, of trying to not take it too personally, trying to not attach my whole self-worth and identity to what I do for a living. And I try to apply it to the podcast as well. Like I posted a reel the other day, and my reels have been doing quite well recently, which is a really nice feeling. It completely bombed. I think it's had like 3 likes and hardly anyone's watched it, and that used to really upset me. But I was like, oh, you know what, I'm just going to leave it there. It's fine. It's just luck sometimes, and I'm trying to think what can you learn from it. But I think if you can try and separate your self-worth and identity from what you do for a living, if you're able to, because it can be really hard if you don't.
No, that's really insightful. Really, really insightful. And the last thing to say is, what is coming up for you? Obviously, you've mentioned a new podcast, which I feel like you're now the king of podcasts. But you've got a new podcast coming up. What's coming up for you, and where can people find you?
I mean, 2 podcasts is maybe a little bit. It's just I was winding myself up earlier saying it's a bit wanky, but maybe we're getting to that phase. But yeah, the new podcast hopefully is coming very soon. I'm honestly really excited about it. I kind of wish I could talk about it, just in case we'd pushed the launch a few times. But all I will say is it's going to be more looking at the screen industry, because my podcast currently is very creative industry focused, and I'm really excited about who I'm working with. And we've had some really, really good guests on so far and done some interesting stuff. So it's going to be a bit different to Just Get a Real Job as well, which is really interesting. Just Get a Real Job's coming up for 200 episodes, so I'm hoping we can get a really good guest on for that. And I'm just trying to keep growing that show as well. We're trying to get in the studio more. I've got a bit more time now that I'm sort of freelance and / unemployed and all that as well. But I don't know, I'll be honest, it's a really uncertain time for me personally at the moment. I'm trying to take everything I'm learning and sort of be honest about it on my show and sort of showcase that journey. But yeah, hopefully an exciting end to the year as well with everything coming up with the new show and all that stuff. So yeah, that's what's coming up. But you can find the podcast wherever you get podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, just Get a Real Job on Instagram, TikTok. Yeah, and we try and put an episode out every week. So, and there's nearly 200. So if you're interested, you can go back through the back catalogue as well.
Amazing. Well, that was brilliant. It's really nerve-wracking for me to interview somebody that's already got a podcast, because you sit there and you go, oh my god, am I going to be any good at this? But it just flows so nicely and so well. Like, the questions that are coming up, the type of things I'm going to ask you. So it's been an absolute pleasure, Jamie. Thank you so much. And I'll leave obviously everything in the bio and the captions down below. But that was another incredible episode of the Rewind Pod. Stay tuned for the next one. See you later.
Thank you very much, Molly. I really appreciate it.
See you later. Bye. Oh, thank